Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast, brought to you by Mayo Clinic. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Tooley.
And I'm Dr. Eric Bothan. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest in ophthalmology, medicine, and more. In today's episode, we're talking with Dr. Andy Barkmeyer, a vitreoretinal surgeon here at the Mayo Clinic. Our topic is going to be NIH-supported multicenter research and the impact on our practices in ophthalmology.
Dr. Andrew Barkmeyer is a vitreoretinal surgeon here at the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Barkmeyer sits on the executive committee for the DRCR Retina Network, is a member of the Macula Society, the Retina Society. He's heavily involved in clinical research involving diabetic retinopathy, retinal vascular disease, telemedicine, healthcare delivery, and complex vitreoretinal surgery. He is a past Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Program Director and Program Director of the Year and Ophthalmology Teacher of the Year Award. We're so happy to have him here to talk about his involvement in multi-center clinical trials. Welcome, Dr. Barkmeyer.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's exciting to sit down with you. This topic today is one that I think all of us need to appreciate, the power of research collaboratively in multi-center efforts. And you have a unique role that we're happy to have you as a guest within the Jaeb Center, specifically in the Diabetic Retinopathy Research Consortium there. I have fairly new footprint in the PDIG role in the executive committee. So both of us are in executive committees within the Jaeb network, you and Retina, me and Peds. But before we get to that and those the opportunities in leadership and research that ways, share with us your journey in research and how you got involved, especially in multi-center research opportunities, and especially for listeners out there that might find similar opportunities in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the time that we enter our careers kind of impacts us in the way that we see new information develop and see practice patterns change. When you see things changing in real time, like I did when I was in fellowship and the Diabetic Retinopathy Clinical Research Network Protocol I data came out, which completely changed the way we treat patients with diabetic macular edema. That was hugely impactful on me on the role of not just how some of these clinical trials shape what we do clinical practice-wise, but also some of the new treatments, how we learn what works best, and what are some of the different ways that we get this information that informs our practice patterns. So I was incredibly impacted by this diabetic retinopathy protocol I trial, which was the first trial to really show that these anti-VEGF medications, ranibizumab in particular, had favorable diabetic macular edema clinical outcomes where they improved 8 or 9 letters of vision with center involving diabetic macular edema compared to laser, which was our old gold standard, or corticosteroid injections, which was something we were also using as well at that time. And this trial really nicely answered some of those questions. And it also was the first trial that had an as-needed PRN treatment algorithm. And it was really neat to see how on a dime, the retina community switched how we treated patients with diabetic macular edema. So when I started my job here at Mayo Clinic, I was really interested in getting involved with clinical research there. And the DRCR network is actually a great opportunity for junior investigators to get involved. Even if you don't have specific expertise or background, you are an expert clinician and able to really participate in these trials. And you can get your site set up to work with the DRCR network. And you need your study coordinators, you need the infrastructure to get that set up, which we have here at Mayo Clinic in spades. And then we started with the Protocol T trial, which was one of the first comparative effectiveness trials between medications in all of medicine, really. And that trial compared the use of ranibizumab versus bevacizumab versus aflibercept for diabetic macular edema. And then I was involved in the Protocol V trial, which looked at anti-VEGF treatments compared to observation versus laser for people without vision loss from diabetic macular edema. And just getting involved with those trials, you really feel like you're contributing to the state of the science. And there are opportunities to get involved with protocol development, where you can go sit on small committees and learn from these giants in the field, experts who are setting up the next wave of trials. And that was really exciting for me. That was something I really enjoyed doing. And then since then, I've stayed involved with the network, and I'm currently the protocol chair for the Protocol AN trial, where we're looking at an oral medication called tanabersat and how that can impact patients with center-involving diabetic macular edema, because we're always looking for new treatment options. So we have these great injectable medications, but if we could have a medication that is an oral medication that is well tolerated and safe, this could be a game changer as well.
I have found in my career kind of a similar path of excitement over being involved in my case, the PDIG network. And, both the DRCR and PDIG are underneath the JABE Center. As a history piece, I went to Michigan for my fellowship, and Dr. Roy Beck, who started the JABE Center down in Florida, had left Michigan years before I had gotten there. But there was such an appreciation for his vision, leadership, and partnership on a national level to identify the ophthalmology clinical practices as a resource that could work together with national funding to answer questions that we all have. And so when I was at Michigan, they were involved in PDIG. I moved to the University of Minnesota for a season, and my mentors there, Gail Summers and Steve Christensen, were all very active. And it was almost like, if you're going to be a pediatric ophthalmologist, you have to be involved in PDIG. And meaningful trials at that time had to do with amblyopia in particular, and whether or not atropine versus on the better seeing eye versus patching had a better long-term outcome, and then how much patching to do. So these questions were answered with power and really a collaboration and practice opinions on what to study and then how to study them with scientific rigor and statistics. And so learning how that all happened as a young faculty was really shaping for me and encouraging. And then I came to Mayo and landed here, and Jonathan Holmes, I appreciated the longevity and the leadership he had within PDIG, along with others, really took me under his wing and gave me opportunities likewise. So throughout my journey as a pediatric ophthalmologist over 20 plus years, it's been sort of a junior chapter that you understand along the way, not just how to care for patients, but how to be using that care to answer questions clinically. And I continue to be involved in PDIG, and like you now on the executive committee within PDIG, as you are in the DRCR group in the executive role, learning about what should we study next, and being able to have a voice and submit opportunities, and then see how that's digested and gets buy-in and gets shaped by, in a very sort of democratic way, what the next studies should be. So it's been quite a journey and shaped your career and mine as we practice in our fields.
So I think, can I chime in for a second? It's just so interesting to hear you both talk about your experience with this collaborative effort to really bring good science to directly impact clinical care in such a meaningful and fast way. I love, and we don't have anything like that in oculoplastics. I'd just be curious about the kind of inner workings of DRCR or PDIG. You're getting NIH funding. What does it mean to be on the executive committee for these groups? Who's overseeing? You're the protocol chair, so are you writing the protocol? Are there staff who work for the organization? Like, how does it all work? It's amazing. Is it all just volunteer doctors who are doing this is super cool. I got to know how it works.
Yeah, so it's a fantastic organization. So it starts with this concept that Roy Beck really had originally, where they developed this coordinating center. There was a nonprofit called the JABE Center, and they started submitting grants, and they built the PDIG, the Pediatric Eye Disease Investigator Group organization in the late 90s. And then in the early 2000s, the Diabetic Retinopathy Clinical Research Network obtained NEI, NIH funding, and they had funding from the NIDDK as well. And they started with these concepts of having an academic-private collaboration, And they also collaborate with industry, with pharmaceutical groups, but independent from some of the incentives and some of the drive of some of the pharmaceutical industry. So you could have independent scientific questions that were structured in the way that the physicians, that the practice, that the patients would want these questions asked and answered. But then we had these robust resources with the Jaeb Center, who had statisticians. They had the ability to run these studies. It takes an incredible amount of administrative effort at a time where the internet and some of the multi-center collaboration was becoming easier and easier. Mm-hmm. And it set a framework to have all of these trials under the same framework, and you just came up with different protocols and ideas for trials along the way. And then there's a structure where there's the scientific group, where there is the chair of the DRCR network, and now that's split into two chairs. There's Dr. Jennifer Sun, who runs all the diabetic retinopathy trials, and Dr. Dan Martin, who runs all of the other retina trials, which is an exciting development over the last 5-6 years, where in addition to diabetic retinopathy, the DRCR Retina Network is investigating things like, what do you do for patients with symptomatic epiretinal membranes but good vision? Do you operate right away or do you wait? These are things that we would not have been able to answer very well. How do you integrate these new technologies such as home OCT into treatment algorithms for patients with wet macular degeneration? Some of these questions don't lend themselves well to be answered in pharmaceutical trials, which are also very important, but there's some specific questions that these network trials really answer the best.
Within PDIG, it's similarly, it's just to reiterate the effort and the alignment with the Jaeb Center that each of our practices can partner with, and together come. It usually starts at meetings. You get connected with or have an interest in being involved, and you make the connections with. For in my sake, it would be the PDIG network, and your particular site might be identified as a site of interest. They have certain criteria for which you would need to be involved. They help make sure your site is able to have whether the IRB support or usually the coordinating. You need to make sure you have in your clinic an individual that can be blinded in certain studies or has certain ability to do testing. And sometimes in private practice that's not feasible. But for most people and most practices, it is. And so if you want to be involved, it's very easy to express interest and start a relationship. And then you get invited to the meetings that we have multiple times a year for the study group. You attend the study groups and you realize, number one, you're introduced to all the current studies that are either wrapping up or ongoing. And then there's an annual schedule for introducing new studies. And anybody in the network can suggest an idea of, I'd like to study whether or not iPhones test vision as good as our vision in clinic because my patients might want to be tested at home. And over time, these are vetted, they're voted on. The executive committees within each organization helps to shape how those are processed and make sure they don't conflict with other studies and learn about whether or not the network should take it on. And then as they're developed, a protocol or a study group that leads that is put together, largely based on interested people. And usually you need one or two people to sort of lead the study. But the Jaeb partners with those individual physicians to draft the documents needed to really shape it and make sure it has the capability to run a new study. And then the study group is all invited to who wants to participate. And provided those pieces show support and it's well designed and has the leadership group behind it, the executive committees help to launch these across the network. And you say short, I mean, some are fairly short, and then others are many, many years to answer some of these questions. I think PDIG's gone from answering some low-hanging fruit, lots of numbers, how many kids have amblyopia, and we all have them in our practices, so why don't we try different patching regimes, and that is easily rolled out, to now we're looking at things like cortical vision impairment studies, uveitis, looking at vision testing in different ways, in home vision testing versus not. We've done registries over, say, cataract and other aspects of care in terms of how people are treating with Botox or strabismus. But for the most part, I think we're finding ourselves evolving with a collaboration between ophthalmology and optometry, leading these ideas together at answering questions that are harder to answer but likely take longer time to answer, and can only be done having 150 plus centers across the country do it together in a protocolized way. So it's just you asked how does this get done? It really is a grassroots thing, and the more you want to be involved, the more you can. You could stand up at the podium and say, "Can we study this?" and sit back down, or you can say, "Can we study this?" and I'd like to be involved, and you will be.
Wow.
So it's a very a neat, powerful organization to be involved with for both the retina and the peds communities, respectively.
Sure. So we know that there's an incredible amount of great ideas within the ophthalmology community. There's a ton of talent. But what I have been most impressed about with these organizations, it just starts with an extremely well-run system and organization. And that goes straight from the leadership to everyone who works at the Jaeb Center, for example, like with Adam Glassman and Cindy Stockdale, and the entire team that will set up these studies for success. They tap into all of the ideas, all of the structures that these retina specialists can come up with. So there's this streamlined process where we go from these ideas to weed out some ideas to really hone in on the best ideas that we can answer in this structure, and then execute it. And then come up with these well-run trials that we answered questions that we all want answered.
And so the organization is helping you as an individual center. I mean, we have so many resources here at Mayo, but say you're in private practice or you're at another academic institution where the IRB seems insurmountable, or just getting a project off the ground. So DRCR or PDIG, all under Jaeb Center, is going to help you navigate those challenges and get the project off the ground. Is that right?
Absolutely. So if you don't have your own IRB, as most people in private practice don't, there's a Jaeb Center IRB that you can use their IRB.
Oh, I see.
All of the data entry is online. There's a web-based online program. There are coordinators within the Jaeb Center that will work with you. They'll help you get set up, and they'll help coach your team. They'll help coach up your team so you're ready to perform really high quality, like game-changing research.
And it really is so
this.
critical that you have those layers of support, because for people in private practice that are not part of a research team normally, they need that support to understand the nuances, because how you test visual acuity, how you're taking the images, how you're measuring strabismus, whatever it might be, needs to be at a standard and executed in a way that's consistent with the study across all the sites in order for this data to be meaningful and provide the outcomes and answer the questions that we do. In addition to helping sites execute studies at their location, Jaeb's also been helpful to generate the new leaders of research in the future. So I think when both of our organizations, or the divisions of the organization, there are opportunities in research to learn how to become more involved in designing these studies, leading these studies, understanding the statistics, understanding the process. And so for young investigators, you might be in the middle of Missouri in a private practice and say, I want to be involved in this research and just do studies. But you also might be at an academic center wanting to grow in your research ability. And PDIG provides opportunity to with these year-long or durations of sub-internships, let's say, to help build your repertoire in multi-center research.
That's fantastic. I love that we've had people on the podcast that I think really encourage young ophthalmologists to get involved with things that might seem out of their reach or just not part of their practice, but this seems very doable. Are you both, as leaders within these networks, aware of growth to other subspecialties? Is there going to be a glaucoma Consortium Network, or I'm going to start the oculoplastics one as soon as we finish this podcast. I'm going to call up the James Center. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think, with each of these efforts, it's time and relationships. And, I think Jabe, my sense is looking for groups to make an impact in ophthalmology, and whether it's another segment of the retina community coming up with a new question, and yet equipping them with the physician and clinical ability to answer the question. I think if there's a glaucoma question out there, I would, we're on the executive committees in our spheres, but I just think it's a organization that allows answers or questions to be answered, and equips ophthalmologists to answer those in a collaborative way. So if you come with a collaborative group of people to answer a good question, I would imagine there's a vehicle to explore and put wheels on the ground to make those studies happen.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is interesting, you both mentioned current studies looking at home monitoring. You've done a lot of kind of telehealth and medicine, healthcare delivery type things. Is that where retina is headed? Is that where PEDS is headed? It seems like that's kind of a new forefront for ophthalmology in general.
Yeah, the technologies are evolving so quickly, and there are clearly going to be changes that are going to continue to happen over the next decade or two. And one of the keys is to actually get good, well-designed questions and answers for how to integrate these into our practice patterns. Because sometimes something seems like a great idea, and then you study it carefully, and it doesn't offer a cost-effective advantage, or there might not be any advantage at all. And we have to face the fact that there are some resource limitations in medicine, and it's really our job, as I see it, to use the resources we have as well as possible to take as good a care of people with real patient-oriented outcomes. And I think that the clinical research with well-designed questions is the way to do it.
Yeah, I echo that. I think the changing landscape of whether photography or vision testing, there's so many things trying to be delivered at home. PEDIG just completed a study looking at visual acuity testing on people's smartphones at home, or I would say ended the study just recently. And I think that data is going to be coming out soon, but I would say it was quite informative for how we should be looking at these new modalities, and both in opportunity but also real limitation. And so just stay tuned to that in publication soon. But I think you need an organization like PEDIG to answer some of these questions, and so that's why it changes practice, because when it has the power to answer them statistically clearly and was designed well, it allows us to either adopt something that's an opportunity for us, or actually turn away from something that might not be an improvement.
Sometimes the pertinent negatives, a negative study, or when you learn something in a well-designed study that wasn't evident from the case series that are out in the literature, that people were adopting, because sometimes you adopt practices based on what you see in the literature and at a case series level. But we've also learned, for example, that with this specific type of photobiomodulation for diabetic macular edema, that it didn't have the results that we were looking for. So that's it helpful to close the book on some at least specific approaches to photobiomodulation. Another example is pneumatic vitreolysis, which you can inject SF6 sulfur hexafluoride bubble into the eye, and you can separate the posterior hyaloid from the macula in people who have vitreomacular traction or macular holes. And it's difficult to know what the risk-benefit profile is from case series, but we ran a trial in the DRCR Retina Network and showed that there might be a higher risk of retinal tears and detachments than we previously realized, and that's very helpful information to answer some of those questions definitively before certain practice patterns take off.
Oh, I love that, and you need those big numbers to answer those questions sometimes.
And rigorous protocols.
Yep.
So and within the PEDIG sphere and retina sphere, new ideas are coming. new protocols are being considered. But any that you can share with us from the retina side of things of a protocols either being launched or soon to launch that we can look forward to.
So right now we're in the middle of Protocol AN, which is a study looking at the oral tanabersat medication for diabetic macular edema, and we're in the middle of that study. That'll be exciting because
Game changer potential.
there are a number of trials right now looking at oral medications that might impact diabetic retinopathy or diabetic macular edema. There's also the Protocol AF trial looking at fenofibrate for reducing the risk of progression of diabetic retinopathy. And there are a number of trials looking at that after we had some initially encouraging data from the FIELD study and from the ACCORD study. But there are a number of new approaches that we're looking at what are the best biomarkers to set up future trials. Some of these trials take 5 years and $15 million to run a trial, but we'd ideally like to be able to run some of these trials trying some new treatments, some of the new strategies at shorter durations. And the DRCR Retina Network's partnering with the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Institute to try to identify some of these new biomarkers, some of these new strategies for running trials more efficiently, more effectively at different durations, and really to set up the next wave of trials as well as possible.
Wonderful.
Yeah. You asked about technology. PDIG's got a fun one I'm excited about coming, looking at binocular treatments of amblyopia. We're so used to blurring or occluding the better eye to get the amblyopic eye to see better. But there's you talk about things available in technologies. Now we have these headsets people put on, and they can either watch movies or play video games. We tried them in the past. There was a Dig Rush game and stuff that kids. It didn't pan out quite as much because the game was boring, but these technologies are getting so amazing that the video games have improved, but also now you can put in virtually any movie, and the machine will give one eye and the other eye a different stimulus. So the better seeing eye gets a reduced either contrast or blur, and the amblyopic eye sees it clearly. And you need both eyes in order to watch the movie richly. And so it drives sort of a anti-suppression amblyopia treatment for kids in that setting, and yet many practices are buying these, or even patients are looking at buying these, but the studies need to be more robust, and PDIG's doing so. Stay tuned. We'll be doing that at Mayo here soon, and sites all across the country to answer that question. So things like that are in both organizations. These ideas, they get brought forth, exciting new frontiers, and it allows us to study them collaboratively. So whether you are a brand new investigator or a little seasoned like you and I, understand that there are networks and relationship opportunities through the Jaeb Center and in collaborative research that complement not how we care for patients, but complement our careers along the way.
And the kids aren't satisfied with Pac-Man or Frogger anymore.
No,
you got to have fancier games.
You got to up your game.
I love it.
I got to learn to play some of these games too.
Wonderful.
So thank you for being
thank you both for
with
your
us
work.
For this a great discussion about multi-center research.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Andy.
You can find all episodes of the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast on our website.
Thank you for listening, and we definitely look forward to sharing more